to Julius. Puts up a three. Yeah! And a
Blitz on the Believe Network. Your host, Russ Heltman. He's my co-host, Neil Meyer, and we have plenty to get to today on this episode of Bearcat Blitz, presented by Bet Online. We'll get to a message from Bet Online in just a few moments. Plenty to get to, though, in terms of today's show. We have Wes Miller doing his summer primer press conference with the team getting ready to fully come back together this coming week and get into those summer workouts, a top 25 projected team at that. And we're already started to see some major outlets put their money where their mouth is in terms of those predictions. And then we'll get into kind of just the overall feeling from the major poll that we'll talk about today in the back half of the show. And we have some early season game times announced for football. I'm loving these game times to start. No nip at night on the foreseeable docket that we have in the first month of the season, so to speak, but we'll get to that in short order. Today's episode, of course, brought to you by Bet Online. It's your number one source for the NBA, NHL playoffs this season. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds while the games are being played are available to you on Bet Online. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our over 150 slots games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Don't forget to use promo code BELIEVE for your 50% welcome bonus on that first deposit. Bet Online, the game starts here. Get to a quick message from our sponsors, and then we'll dive into the show. Top takeaway from Wes Miller's summer press conference. Neil, we'll bring you in now, my man. Neil Meyer of the frontofficenews.com and bearcatstalk.com. Plenty to parse through from it was like a 25, nearly half-hour long press conference from Wes Miller on Wednesday afternoon. The team is set. The roster is set. He joked that unless they're going to give him some more scholarships, the team is largely finalized, outside of maybe what we were talking about last show, one or two walk-on spots still available. And obviously the news of Coach Buckley coming over from South Carolina to Cincinnati. We touched on that on the show just a couple of days ago. So things largely finalized, deal, and now we can just kind of let this simmer, let the pieces come together in the summer. And this is, as Wes Miller kind of noted, the first time in a long time he's had a chance to actually build out a summer plan for the program with some time to do it.
Yeah, and that's a great leadway topic there, Russ. Obviously, it was discussed yesterday about what this offseason is like compared to year one in the Big 12, because obviously last year you had all the waiver issues and whatnot, the two-time transfer rule, what the outcomes could be, all that funky scenarios that you don't have to worry about this season. So now he went and he built a roster for this season, and he's now got a full summer offseason to work towards that offseason plan to really build ahead and not have to worry about some circumstances that he can't control outside of his office there in the Lindner Center at the University of Cincinnati. But Russ, there's a lot of positives to take away from that press conference yesterday. As you mentioned, it was nearly a half-hour long press conference and a lot of great stuff to take away for it. So obviously, Russ, I'll throw it back to you. I thought, what was the most interesting thing that you personally took away from that press conference yesterday?
I think people will kind of the big hot topic is the transfers and the three big transfers that they were able to get into the program with the three exiting spots. But I was more keen in on the guys that stayed and Wes Miller's discussion about those guys that they were able to retain. Just the fact that those guys, I think, are more of an indication of the health of the program as it stands today than even the three transfers that came in, because those guys have been exposed to the coaching staff for a year or multiple years at this point. They know exactly what they want from this program, what kind of culture they're trying to build, and they've chosen to forego any other tampering, any other options that came across the text wires over the past few months, past 6 months, even throughout the season, I'm sure guys were getting contacted illegally in terms of the Wild West of tampering we have in college sports right now, but they didn't leave. None of the key contributors on this team last year decided to up and leave outside of Victor Locken, who down the stretch, you're not going to really call him a key contributor. He was kind of phased out of the program, out of the lineup. So the fact that they were able to retain all of the guys that they wanted to retain, essentially, it feels like they were able to retain all the guys that they top-notch wanted to retain. I think that's what stood out the most to me, and just the fact that Wes Miller made, I think he was talking about, was he talking about the I'm back graphics, kind of just the fact that they were making those graphics for the players, and just the fact that he wanted the program. I don't know if this was necessarily his idea. I don't think he's the one making the graphics, so to speak, of having an intern or graphic designer do that, but wanted to make sure that the program highlights those guys that stay just as much as the social media posts and all that are highlighting the guys coming in, because in the day and age, like you mentioned, where there's so much change, where it's so easy to get headlines for changing, it's not as easy. You don't get as many headlines for staying put and choosing to stay the course. And that's kind of what stood out to me of how strong this culture is, Neil, evidenced by how many guys they were able to retain on a team that was a fringe team in the power conference, just entered the power conference, just getting your feet wet with a new coaching staff, kind of establishing their culture. A lot of times you can see teams that are kind of on the surface where Cincinnati has been in their timeline over the past 5-6 years get poached because of those situations, but not Cincinnati, with the history that they have, with the coaching staff that they have, and most importantly, the man at the head of that coaching staff, Wes Miller, and what he has done to show these players that their best path forward is in a red, black, and white Cincinnati uniform.
Yeah, and that's a great talking point, Russ, because you mentioned it. He made it a priority to really highlight the players who elected to stay, whether that's Simas Lukosius, Jizzle James, Day Thomas, Dan Skillings, Jizzle James, a couple others. And he also noted in that press conference on the retention of the roster was that all the players that announced that they were coming back, they wanted to be here. They wanted to be here. They felt like there was unfinished business and they could feel the improvement. But the biggest thing was he gave a lot of praise to his staff for what they were able to do. And that shows that how much he trusts in this staff, whether that's Coach Morgan, Coach Dollar, now Coach Buckley coming in, Coach Adams. He's showing the trust that he has. And I mean, it's paying off because look, you get 4 or 5 of your key players from a season ago to come back. But the biggest thing was that he made it clear to say that the players wanted to be back at Cincinnati, and they proved that there early in the offseason. But Russ, I think when we're talking about the retention of the roster, I'm sure you've been on social media as much as I have to see kind of some things floating around there. But that statement right there where he said, let's celebrate the guys who elected to stay here and not just the new transfers, it's getting a lot of love from a lot of former players under Wes Miller. And I think that's something that has to go get recognized. I mean, we saw Landers Nolly tweet earlier saying
David DeJulius, I saw.
David DeJulius also retweeted the video saying everyone within that program is empowered and valued, a program built on high level standards, principles, and hard work, no gimmicks, just an everyday pursuit to achieve greatness. # the movement. So there's a lot of former players that bought into Coach Miller early on into that process and still to this day have firm belief in what Coach Miller is building here at Cincinnati. But there's a lot of positive things to take away, Russ. But first, I think you have to start with that. And then you turn the page to what does Arrington Page bring to the table? What does Connor Hickman? What does Dylan Mitchell? There's a lot of positive things that you can really take down. But the biggest thing is it sounds like Cincinnati is close to being fully healthy heading into the offseason.
Yep, good transition.
Fully cleared. And Day Thomas not far out from his recovery, and he is on track to be ready by mid-June, according to Wes Miller. So overall, things are trending in the right direction that Cincinnati is going to be fully healthy there by mid-June, roughly, pending everything with Day Thomas's foot injury. But overall, Russ, I think there's a lot of positives to take away, especially after hearing what Coach Miller had to say Wednesday afternoon.
No doubt. And the fact that he highlighted those injuries, and I'll touch on kind of what he said exactly in regarding the injuries. When it comes to CJ Frederick, quote, CJ had a pretty good spring. He's been consistent, kind of built up week after week over the last 5 or 6 weeks pretty consistently. He's fully cleared, ready to go Monday. Massive news. Happy for CJ Frederick. Fingers crossed that guy can just stay healthy for a full year of his life. Just can we get a year stretch where CJ Frederick can stay healthy, basketball gods? He's earned it. Please, just find a way to get it done if you're up there listening. Day Thomas, he had a doctor's appointment a couple weeks ago. He said, Miller said roughly 3 weeks ago, so beginning of May, and he said Day feels 100% good. The doctor said everything looks good, that the screw is healing fine, and they're just taking it kind of ultra cautiously with no need to really do it. There's obviously no games going on anytime soon, so just be as cautious as possible, and they're going to slow ramp him into the summer there. But overall, things trending in the great direction for Cincinnati basketball, a program that Miller said, quote, they see as one of the great programs in college basketball, Neil. And that was the other thing that really stood out to me, the fact that it's showtime in the Natty. It's national championship hunting season in the Natty. And how do you get those national championships, Neil? You get national championship level talent. And that's exactly what UC has pursued in prior cycles, but more so definitively this cycle with all the names that we heard, whether it was a Duke player and Sean Stewart, landing a Dylan Mitchell out of Texas, a former top 10 overall recruit just a couple of years ago in all the major services. These are the types of things that you have to get done in today's sport of college basketball to have a chance to compete for Elite Eights, compete for Final Fours, compete for national championships. And it feels, though, Neil, as if the NIL coffers are aligned with the vision of this coaching staff. And when those two things are aligned, you can go big game hunting a little bit more surprisingly and a little bit maybe more quickly than people anticipated out of this program. And that was evidenced by getting a guy in Dylan Mitchell who had offers, was very friendly with a team that just went to the Elite Eight less than 18 months ago, Miami. Auburn, another team that was a finalist right there, an Elite Eight staple under Bruce Pearl. They've been to multiple of them. They're in the NCAA tournament every single year. They're a staple program of national prominence in this country. And that's exactly what Cincinnati is trying to be. And they're trending in that direction now, Neil, as we will get to the ranking after this break. But I think I mentioned earlier in the show that I'm getting all the news mixed up. It's been a full news week in terms of the basketball side of things. We did not touch on the South Carolina assistant coach going from South Carolina to Cincinnati. We'll do that right now. When you look at Cincinnati landing another bench assistant to replace Josh Leffler, it's going to come in the form of Tim Buckley. He's a veteran coach, has helped find names like Anthony Edwards, has helped coach the guys like that. Has helped one of them. I'm mixing up with Chad Dollar. I'm thinking of Dwayne Wade is who I was thinking of.
Dwayne Wade, with Tim Buckley. Yogi Ferrell, the whole Indiana squad.
Cody Zeller, all those guys. A big ring endorsement from Tom Crean, his former boss and the guy he coached with at Indiana and Marquette for a long time. Neil, Tim Buckley replacing Josh Leffler, who was headed to Loyola, Maryland. He's been with South Carolina since 2022, joined the Gamecocks after 3 seasons at UNLV as an assistant. And it I think it's kind of why I got those two mixed up, Chad Dollar and Tim Buckley, because it's a similar kind of situation where Wes Miller gets a premier assistant to come with him from the SEC in Chad Dollar. And now he's able to do it again, Neil, with a veteran, highly respected assistant in Tim Buckley coming over to Cincinnati from South Carolina, has coached since 1986 and has been an assistant at schools like Marquette, Iowa, Indiana, and Wisconsin, as we mentioned. It seems like they're not losing really any kind of basketball acumen, game-to-game breakdown acumen that you're losing out the door with Josh Leffler. And Neil, it's I guess an argument could be made. It's hard to argue coaching upgrades over one another on the assistant side, especially when there's not really any stats to back it up with. But you could make an argument that this is an upgrade on the bench for Cincinnati.
Yeah, it's definitely a big addition to the bench for Cincinnati. But I think it's worth noting that there is a lot of connections for Tim Buckley to Cincinnati, Russ, that people might not know about. And that is Buckley's connections to Cincinnati. I mean, he coached Drew Adams at Iowa. He also spent time with Jake Thielen, who was a graduate manager with Tom Crean at Indiana. So there's the connection there. But, I mean, look at the kind of caliber players and all that he has coached and been a part of. I mean, looking down at some of the names that he has coached, I mean, he has also, for those who didn't know, spent time in the league as an assistant as well. So that's a big time addition there on the bench. But you're looking at the likes of NBA players, Coach Cody Zeller, Victor Oladipo, OG Anunoby, obviously 3 guys right there who had stellar NBA careers. OG Anunoby still playing with the Knicks. Victor Oladipo is still playing. Cody Zeller is still playing, but he's known as the shot doctor. And I mean, look at what he did with a guy like Yogi Ferrell, Russ. I think that's a prime example right there. Obviously, Yogi Ferrell had a tremendous career, but I think Tim Buckley played a tremendous role in Yogi Ferrell's career. And we saw the importance of him on that Indiana squad. But man, it's a big time addition, Russ. I mean, you talked about it. He brings over Chad Dollar from Georgia, who had very big ties down there, played a big role in recruiting Anthony Edwards to Georgia. This time they land.
And he's obviously had a huge impact on the Cincinnati recruiting. I mean, as we can see over the past few years.
Yeah. And I mean, heck, Coach Dollar, I mean, we've had him on our tip-off talk pod, Russ. And I mean, we asked him to break down that recruiting, how he would throw the pitch to us. And I mean, 3 simple questions is all it took. So 3 simple questions. And it was pretty interesting to hear how he attacks the recruiting aspect. But man, it's a big time addition, Russ. It really is. So I'm very curious to see how this new coaching staff gels together. But hey, Russ, it's going to be an exciting time with this coaching staff, especially with this roster too. I think this is going to be probably a very, very unique season for the Cincinnati Bearcats, to say the least.
Bearcats fans hearing the term shot doctor, their eyes just light up. Hard eyes just go all over because, I mean, Neil, if he can turn Dylan Mitchell and or Dan Skillings into competent jump shooters off the catch from distance, woo, Nelly.
Opening a lot of things up.
Nelly. I don't know what we're going to be talking about at the end of the season if he's able to do that. Because I'm going to be raising I have an Elite 8 ceiling on this roster right now. If I'm seeing the shot doctor doctoring up those shots, we might be raising that ceiling.
And you also got to think too, Russ. I mean, we've talked about it frequently with Simas Lukosis's shots going down at the end of the season, shooting nearly 40%. But you get the shot doctor with fine-tuning that. Day Thomas even in that role. I mean, it's going to be really fun to see how this plays out. And Russ, it's also worth noting too that you still have Rayvon Griffith there sitting there that after the red shirt. Like it's going to be a very fun offseason and see what plays out, especially now that you add a guy with so much potential and experience on the coaching staff in Tim Buckley. It's going to be a fun time. It's going to be a fun time, Russ.
Right. That's what makes this roster specifically in today's sport of college basketball so unique, because guys like Rayvon Griffith are still bought in. Redshirt year, through no fault of his own, just not enough spots, too many cooks in the kitchen, and he still wants to be a part of this thing. He still wants to be a part of this special program that they are building, and we'll see how special it can be in the upcoming months and in the fall. Projections saying it's going to be pretty special, especially if they are able to crack the top 25 right to start the season and stay within it throughout the majority of the campaign. We'll get to that early preseason ranking from The Athletic after this break and take a look at the early season kickoff times for Cincinnati Bearcats football right here on Bearcat Blitz, presented by Bet Online. One more quick basketball topic to touch on before we get to the football side of things, with 3 early season game kickoff times announced. The Athletic has Cincinnati as a top 25 team heading into the 2024-25 season. I saw that the Field of 68 had Cincinnati at number 16 overall nationally, and Cincinnati in the Athletic ranking is number 22 nationally, highlighting just the top 20 defense. You return Aziz Bandago to that unit. You add Dylan Mitchell to a top 20 defense that really didn't lose any key contributors outside of John Newman III. They're obviously going to have to replace his on-ball perimeter defense. We'll see if Dylan Mitchell is able to do majority of that. But Neil, the 15 to 22 range kind of feels like where Cincinnati is going to land. And I would be, at this point, honestly shocked if they are not ranked in the top 25 of the AP preseason poll.
Yeah, it's safe to say that Cincinnati will probably find themselves within the top 25 of the AP preseason poll. But, I mean, you're looking at these early season polls, Russ. I mean, they're sitting at anywhere from 16 to 22, as you mentioned. But the Athletic had them sitting at 22, just one spot ahead of crosstown rival Xavier. So that's something that is pretty unique and interesting to keep an eye on. But with the potential and all the returning players, Russ, we talk about the potential, the offensive rebounding. They were a top 10 rebounding team in the country last season. Very good on the defensive aspect. A lot of good defensive metrics, had them as one of the best defensive teams in the country. But you add a caliber player like Dylan Mitchell who can guard 1 through 5. Wes Miller gave a lot of praise to Arrington Page yesterday that he could make one of the biggest jumps from freshman to sophomore season in all of college basketball. So that's awesome.
Did he mention that he had mono? Was that what he said?
He had mono last season as well out at USC.
That's relevant, I would say.
Right. So overall, I mean, you look at what he has been able to do this offseason. And Russ, it's worth noting for a guy like Arrington Page in this kind of defense behind Aziz Bandago, 6'11", 245 pounds right now. Give him this offseason with Coach Rayfeld and the Monster Factory, you don't know what could happen. I mean, we saw the transformation last year with Jamil Reynolds, and what Coach Rayfeld did with him in one offseason was crazy. Now that you get Arrington Page here early in the cycle, it's going to be interesting. But, man, Russ, this team, anywhere from 16 to 22, I think that's where they sat in most of the preseason ranks as of today. But it's safe to say, as you mentioned, the Elite Eight is the floor for them.
I would say
the floor, ceiling. My bad, flip that. But
I would say the tournament should be the
floor for sure.
Yeah, and
the tournament's the floor, but the ceiling is very, very high for this team. And I mean, Russ, let's talk about on paper depth. Depth was the biggest thing that came up in yesterday's press conference as well. Was the term depth of this roster? I mean, you're looking at Wes Miller. We've talked about it. You can go 8 or 9 guys right now that you could mess around and throw in a random starting 5 that could consist of any 8 to 9 players. And that's something you're going to need in the Big 12, but also you see throughout college basketball as well. So it's going to be really interesting to see what comes out of the AP preseason polls as well.
You guys probably get those in mid-September, I would imagine, late September, with the season not tipping off, unfortunately, until the first week of November. Kicking off the Bearcats football season a lot earlier than that. We are, I think, I saw in the one of our Bearcat chats, exactly 93 days to kick off as of this recording, and they released the schedule times for the first month of the season, actually exactly 93 days to the kickoff time. Against Towson, they're taking on the Towson Tigers at 2:30 p.m. on August 31st. Following week, at home against Pitt, 12 p.m. Eastern, and they're facing Miami at noon once again the following week at Miami. Neil, not a ton to dive into with the game times. Obviously notable that we haven't seen a nip at night yet. I'm sure we'll see one pop up in the when they start announcing.
I think we had 2 last year, correct? We had 2 nip at nights last year, right?
Miami was at least one, and then there was definitely
Miami was one
4 p.m. kick maybe that turned into a nip at night potentially.
Yeah, so overall, I mean, as you talk about these scheduled times, Russ, I like me personally, I'm a fan of the 2:30 or the 12 o'clock games.
Obviously, give me all those 2:30 kicks or before, as many as possible. Like I said, I'm a fan of, I like noon, get my day started. Let's get the game kicked off. Let's get the game done right to start the day, or give me nip at night. Give me the night action. Give me the ambiance, the fervor, the crowd going crazy, all that stuff. But to anything like 2:30 to 3:30, it just feels like it's just like the day's dragging a little bit. And I think I've asked players this, Neil. I asked them, I like to ask them after in our practice chats throughout the year, like what times they like to play. And almost everybody says noon. They like just getting up, getting going, getting to the field, getting ready instead of, because a lot of the times, I mean, if you're playing a night game, a night game, you're staying in the hotel for all day long.
Most of your day.
Yeah. So those are the game times. We have them announced, and we have a full wrap up of the Bearcats off season with a new coach in the fold as well. Glad I kind of put those two together mid-show, realizing that we did not talk about that earlier in the week. For Neil Meyer, I'm Russ Eltman. This has been Bearcat Blitz on the Believe Network, presented by Bet Online.
This is the second. 15 seconds left. Shot clock off. 4-point game. DeJulius puts up a three.